Morgana was abandoned as a child, marked by the pain of rejection, and grew up believing she would never be loved. But a surprising twist leads her to discover devastating secrets about her past. On a journey of forgiveness and redemption, she finds the true meaning of family and turns her suffering into a powerful force to help others. When the truth finally comes to light, Morgana will have to face her deepest fears to find the peace she has always sought. An emotional story of love, sacrifice, and overcoming that will keep you hooked until the last second. The shadow of loneliness. Morgana always knew something was wrong with her life. It wasn't a clear, identifiable issue, but more of a persistent unease. A shadow that trailed her every step, never fully revealing itself. Since she was very young, an emptiness accompanied her, a void she couldn't understand, but that consumed her day by day. Her memories of her parents were hazy, distant fragments wrapped in mists that blurred her recollections. What little she did recall left only one painful certainty: they had abandoned her. She was left at an orphanage, a fragile and frightened girl, without explanation or goodbyes. The cold, austere structure of the place felt as welcoming as a prison, and Morgana, even at her tender age, sensed she didn't belong there. The other children, with their loud voices and incessant movements, seemed like an uncontrollable whirlwind around her. Morgana, however, couldn't connect with them. On the rare occasions she ventured to approach a group, she was quickly pushed away, either by her own shyness or by the indifference of the other children. Most of her time was spent alone, isolated, trying to occupy herself with the old books she found in the orphanage's small library. But the stories didn't fill the void she felt. Everything changed the day Eudora walked through the orphanage door. She was a simple woman, with a warm smile that radiated kindness and calloused hands that told stories of a life of hard work. When the other children ran toward Eudora, hoping to be chosen, Morgana withdrew even further, curling up in a corner of the room. But Eudora, with her intuitive wisdom, wasn't fooled by appearances. She noticed the solitary girl, observing her with eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. Eudora approached Morgana, ignoring the tumult of the other children around her. She knelt beside her and asked softly, "Do you like stories?" Morgana hesitated, raising her eyes, unsure of how to respond. It was the first time someone had spoken to her so kindly. She just nodded shyly, unable to look away from the woman who seemed so different from everyone else she had ever met. Eudora smiled again, this time with even more tenderness, and extended her hand to Morgana. "Then come with me. I have many stories to tell you." That phrase was like a key unlocking something deep inside Morgana. For the first time in a long while, she felt an unfamiliar warmth growing in her chest. The hand that held Eudora's was small and hesitant, but full of a new hope Morgana hadn't known could exist. As she left the orphanage, Morgana looked back only once, seeing the other children who continued in their chaotic routine, and realized her life was about to change forever. A new life with Eudora. Eudora lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a garden that, although simple, was always in bloom. For Morgana, this small, lively place was like an oasis in the emotional desert she had lived in. Eudora, despite her simple life, welcomed Morgana as a daughter, filling the girl's emptiness with love and care. Over the years, Morgana was enveloped by a sense of security she had never known before. Eudora was a natural storyteller, and during long nights they would sit together by the fireplace, where Eudora would weave magical tales about distant worlds and thrilling adventures. Morgana, her eyes shining with enthusiasm, listened to every word attentively, diving into the universes Eudora created for her. Yet despite the love and comfort she found with Eudora, the feeling of abandonment that Morgana had carried since childhood never completely disappeared. It was like a shadow, always present, reminding her of the unanswered questions about her past. Eudora sensed this pain, but instead of trying to erase it, she encouraged Morgana to face it. "Sometimes, my dear, the answers we seek are within us, waiting for the right moment to be discovered." This simple but profound wisdom left a deep mark on Morgana. As she grew older, her curiosity about human behavior and emotional complexities deepened. Inspired by her own internal struggles, she decided to study psychology, hoping to understand and perhaps heal the wounds she carried. During her studies, Morgana stood out as a dedicated and brilliant student. Her passion for helping others was evident, and her professors often praised her empathy and ability to connect with patients. However, while Morgana helped others confront their own demons, she continued to struggle with the feeling of rejection that had accompanied her since childhood, the will and the decision to face the past. Years later, Morgana had graduated and become successful in her career, establishing a reputation as a talented psychologist. But the feeling of emptiness persisted. Morgana knew that despite everything she had achieved, something was still missing. Then the final blow came. Eudora, who had always been her safe haven, passed away of natural causes. Eudora's death brought all the fears and insecurities Morgana had suppressed for so long back to the surf. The house that had once been full of life and laughter now felt empty and somber. During the funeral, Morgana felt more alone than ever, as if she were back at the orphanage, waiting for someone who would never come. It was during the painful task of sorting through Eudora's belongings that Morgana made a discovery that would change her life forever. Hidden among Eudora's old papers was a will. The document revealed that, despite her modest life, Eudora was the widow of a very wealthy man. The will made it clear that the entire estate, including a fortune Morgana had never imagined, now belonged to her. The shock was overwhelming. Eudora, who had always lived so simply, had never shown any signs of wealth, and Morgana finally understood why. The modesty was a deliberate choice, a way to protect Morgana from the dangers and envy that could arise, but the revelation brought with it a new wave of pain. Eudora was no longer there to explain everything, to tell the stories Morgana still. This discovery, however, rekindled a flame Morgana had been trying to ignore, the need to discover the truth about her biological parents. Eudora's death, combined with the revelation about the inheritance, made Morgana realize she could no longer run from her past. It was time to face the questions that had haunted her since childhood. With a new determination, Morgana decided to use part of the inheritance to finance her search for the truth. She hired a private investigator and began delving into the past, looking for any clue that would lead her to her biological parents. The first lead came from a small, isolated town where Eudora had mentioned spending part of her life before adopting Morgana. The search for the truth, Morgana knew her search for answers wouldn't be easy, but she was determined to face whatever came her way. Armed with Eudora's will and documents, she set out on her journey, driven by the burning need to understand why her biological parents had abandoned her. Upon arriving in the small town, Morgana began asking discreet questions. The locals, suspicious at first, gradually opened up as Morgana shared a bit of her story. One name in particular kept coming up: Alban, a man who had lived in the town years ago, but left abruptly. The descriptions matched the few memories Morgana had of her biological EE. Morgana managed to locate an elderly woman, Celine, who had known Alban and his wife well. Sitting in a rocking chair on her porch, Celine told Morgana a story that left her stunned. Alban, her father, had been involved in risky and apparently illegal businesses. The life he led was full of dangers, and he and his wife lived under constant threat. Celine also mentioned something even more disturbing. Alban had been forced to flee with his wife, leaving everything behind, including their daughter. They were being hunted by dangerous enemies who would use any weakness against them, including young Morgana. The revelation shook Morgana deeply. She had always believed she was abandoned because she was unwanted, but now she knew the abandonment was a desperate attempt to save her. Determined to dig deeper, Morgana continued her search, this time with more information. With the support of the private investigator she had hired using Eudora's inheritance, Morgana tracked Alban and his wife to a small coastal town where they were living in seclusion under false names. However, the meeting would not be easy. The reunion and revelations. When Morgana finally found the house where her biological parents lived, she hesitated before knocking on the door. Her hands trembled and her heart raced. What if they rejected her again? What if she was just a painful reminder of the past they wanted to forget? But despite the fear that paralyzed her, Morgana knew she had to face this moment. It was the only way to find peace. The door was opened by an elderly woman with grey hair tied in a bun and tired eyes full of recognition. Morgana knew immediately that this was Celine, her biological mother. The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken emotions. Celine opened her mouth to speak, but the words failed her. Tears began to roll down her face, and she extended a trembling hand to touch Morgana's face, as if to confirm that she was real. "You've come back," Celine whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. Morgana felt a lump in her throat and couldn't speak, but the look in Celine's eyes wasn't one of rejection. It was one of deep love and regret. Alban appeared behind Celine, and upon seeing Morgana, he seemed to age even more in seconds. His shoulders, already hunched by the weight of the years, sank further, and the man Morgana could barely recognize as the father who had abandoned her now seemed broken. "Morgana," he said, his voice almost inaudible but full of pain. As they sat in the small living room, Morgana tried to absorb what was happening. The house, though simple, exuded a sense of warmth and security that she didn't expect. But what impressed her most were the faces of her biological parents, so marked by time and Sue. Celine began to speak, her voice trembling as she recounted how they had been forced to flee, leaving everything behind, including their daughter, to protect her. "I never wanted to leave you, Morgana," Celine said, tears flowing freely now. "But I saw no other choice. I thought of you every day, wondering if you were safe, if someone was caring for you." Alban, who had remained silent until then, finally found his voice. "I knew what we were doing was cruel, but I couldn't let them use you too. I couldn't." His voice faltered, and he ran a trembling hand over his face as if trying to erase the painful memories. Morgana listened in silence, feeling a mix of sadness, anger, and relief. She wondered why they had never come looking for her, why they had allowed her to live so many years without answers. But as she looked into her parents' eyes, she realized they too had carried a terrible burden. They weren't monsters. They were desperate people trying to do their best in an impossible sea. As Celine continued to speak, Morgana found herself reflecting on what this meant for her. The abandonment she had always believed was due to a lack of love now revealed itself as an act of sacrifice. What should she do with this new understanding? What does it mean to forgive someone who left you to save their own life? She didn't know the answers yet, but for the first time she felt she could start searching for them. The shadow of the past, the months that followed her reunion with her biological parents, were filled with intense and contradictory emotions for Morgana. The new routine she established alongside Alban and Celine, while trying to maintain her dedication to the psychological support center, seemed calm on the surface, but something deep still disturbed her inner peace. Morgana threw herself into her work with the children, trying to find purpose amidst the whirlwind of feelings she was facing. However, there was a persistent unease, a shadow that seemed to refuse to disappear no matter how much she tried to ignore it. During one of her visits to her parents' home, Morgana noticed that Alban was more dejected than usual. His movements were slow and hesitant, as if he were carrying the weight of something he couldn't share. After lunch, when Celine went out to tend to the garden, Alban called Morgana to the small backyard, where they sat together on an old wooden bench that seemed as ancient as the stories they carried. Alban looked at Morgana with tired eyes, but filled with a silent determination. He knew he could no longer hide what tormented him. "Morgana," he began, his voice grave and trembling, "there's something I need to tell you, something I've kept hidden for many years, and that I can no longer keep secret." Morgana felt her heart race, a mix of anticipation and fear taking over her thoughts. She knew Alban was about to reveal something important, something that could change everything she had rebuilt so far. Alban took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment before continuing, as if preparing to release a burden he had carried for far too long. "Before I met your mother, I was involved in businesses that weren't clean. I was foolish. I got involved with the wrong people. By the time you were born, I was already trying to leave that life behind, but it wasn't so simple." Morgana listened in silence, her gaze fixed on Alban's face, trying to absorb every word. The weight of what he was about to say was palpable in the air. "One of the men I did business with," Alban continued, "was a dangerous man. Orion. When I realized the danger he represented, I tried to cut ties, but Orion didn't take it well. He found out about you and your mother and started threatening us. There was no safe place for us. We decided the only way to protect you was to leave you in a place where Orion would never find you." Morgana felt a knot form in her throat. Everything she had believed about her abandonment was being rewritten before her eyes. The abandonment had not been due to a lack of love, but as a desperate attempt to save her. "I thought I was saving you," Alban said, his voice failing as tears began to form in his eyes. "But the truth is, I never stopped blaming myself for leaving you there alone. I thought that with time the danger would pass, but Orion never gave up on his revenge." Morgana couldn't speak, her mind spinning with the revelation. Knowing she had been a pawn in a deadly game, used to manipulate and hurt her parents, was hard to bear, but at the same time, she understood that her parents did what they thought was necessary to protect her, even if it meant carrying the pain of her absence for a... Alban continued, revealing that he had recently received new threats from Orion, who was now more powerful and dangerous than ever. Morgana realized that even after all these years, Alban's past continued to haunt them, and worse, it now threatened her directly. But Morgana, instead of succumbing to fear, felt a determination grow inside her. She was no longer the vulnerable child who needed to be abandoned to survive. She was a strong woman, capable of facing the demons that tormented her family. "I'm not going to let this continue, Father," Morgana said, her voice firm and full of conviction. "If Orion is still out there, we're going to face him, and we're going to end this, once and for all." Alban looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. He knew that what she proposed was dangerous, but he also knew that he could no longer protect her by hiding the truth. For the first time, Alban felt he was not alone in this fight. And for the first time, Morgana felt she had the power to finally close the most painful chapter of her life. Confronting the past, Morgana was shocked but not paralyzed. The initial anger and fear that overwhelmed her were quickly replaced by a fierce determination. She was no longer the abandoned, vulnerable child. She was a strong woman, a trained psychologist who dedicated her life to helping others overcome their traumas. And now, she was determined to confront her own dark past once and for all. With the help of the private investigator who had assisted her before, Morgana began investigating Orion and his current activities. She discovered that he was still active in the underworld, but now with a more structured and dangerous criminal organization. The risk was real, but Morgana was willing to face it to protect her parents and put an end to this threat once and for all. For weeks, Morgana and the investigator devised a plan to expose Orion and his organization, using the fortune she had inherited from Eudora to finance the operations. It was a dangerous game, but Morgana knew she had to do it. She could not allow Alban's past to continue haunting their lives. The plan culminated in a tense confrontation, where Morgana, with the help of authorities she discreetly involved, set a trap for Orion. On a night darker than any other, in an isolated and somber location, Morgana, alongside police officers and investigators, waited anxiously as Orion arrived at the place where he believed he was about to close a lucrative deal. When the operation was completed and Orion was captured, Morgana felt a wave of relief mixed with deep exhaustion. The man who had haunted her life directly and indirectly was finally in custody. The danger had passed, and for the first time, Morgana felt she could breathe without the weight of the past on her shoulders. Rebuilding bonds. After the confrontation, Morgana returned to her parents' home, exhausted but relieved. When she arrived, she found Alban and Selena waiting for her, their faces marked by worry. Upon seeing Morgana safe and sound, Selena ran to embrace her, and Alban, with tears in his eyes, held his daughter's hand. "We never wanted you to know about all this," Alban said, his voice choked. "But you deserve the truth, and you deserve to live in peace." Morgana, still feeling the impact of the recent events, looked at her parents with new understanding. They were not just the people who abandoned her. they were also the people who loved her deeply and did what they thought was necessary to keep her safe. Now, with Orion out of the picture, Morgana felt that she could finally begin to fully heal her wounds and move forward. As she rebuilt her life, Morgana became even more involved with the children at the psychological support center. She realized that by helping them overcome their own traumas, she was also healing her own wounds. Morgana began working on special projects for the younger children, offering activities that helped them express their emotions and build confidence. In one of these sessions, she met Ria, a 7-year-old girl who had been abandoned at the center's door on a rainy night. Ria was a closed-off child, with eyes that seemed to carry the weight of the world. Morgana saw much of herself in that girl, and so she dedicated special time to help her. Slowly, Ria began to open up, sharing her fears and anxieties, and Morgana became the maternal figure Ria never had. One afternoon, as she watched the children playing in the garden, Selene approached Morgana. "You're doing something wonderful here, Morgana," she said with a proud smile. "These children, they have you. And in a way, you're healing yourself too." Morgana looked at Ria, now happily running with the other children, and realized that Selene was right. The support center was not just a place of healing for the children, but also for her. Each step she took to help them was a step away from her painful past and toward a brighter future. A new beginning. After the confrontation that finally brought Orion to justice, Morgana's life began to take a new direction. The imminent danger had passed, but the emotional scars left by recent events and her family's dark past still lingered. Morgana knew that complete healing would take time, but for the first time in her life, she felt she was on the right path. With Orion out of the picture, Alban and Selene were finally able to live without the constant fear that had accompanied them for decades. Morgana encouraged her parents to move closer to the psychological support center she had founded, where they could rebuild their lives while contributing to the work Morgana was doing for the children. Initially hesitant, they eventually accepted, realizing that this was an opportunity to reconnect with their daughter and give back the support and understanding she had offered them. The move was an emotional and challenging process. Alban and Selene, though elderly and tired, found a new purpose by getting involved in the support center's work. Alban, with his practical skills, helped maintain the place, while Selene, with her caring nature, began cooking for the children and sharing her wisdom in quiet conversations. Morgana, for her part, felt that the cycle of her life was completing itself. The psychological support center was thriving, not just because of the dedication and resources she had invested, but also because of the love that her biological parents and Eudora had taught her. The children who came there, many with painful stories of abandonment and rejection, saw in Morgana a maternal and inspiring figure. She knew exactly what they were going through and helped them find hope and rebuild their lives, just as she had done. One afternoon, while organizing a fundraising event for the support center, Morgana sat on a bench in the garden, watching the children play around. Selene quietly approached and sat beside her. For a few minutes, they remained silent, enjoying the moment. "I never imagined you would grow up to become such a strong woman," Selene said, her voice soft but full of pride. "I know our abandonment caused you a lot of pain, and I regret that every day. But you turned that pain into something beautiful." Morgana smiled, looking at her mother with tenderness. "I never imagined I could forgive and move on either," she replied. "But having you and Dad around, finally understanding the whole story, helped me find the peace I needed." Alban, who had approached without them noticing, joined them, sitting next to Morgana. He placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, his eyes full of gratitude. "You are our greatest victory, Morgana," he said, his voice breaking. "And I know Eudora would be very proud." Morgana felt a wave of emotions wash over her. The burden she had carried for so many years had finally lifted, replaced by a sense of fulfillment and wholeness. She was surrounded by love, not just from her parents, but also from the children she now saw as part of her family. The unraveling, the days following that heartfelt dinner, brought a sense of peace to Morgana that she had never known before. Her parents, Alban and Selene, had finally found a place in her life where they could contribute positively, and Morgana was beginning to believe that her tumultuous past was truly behind her. The support center continued to flourish, and Morgana felt content, surrounded by the love of the children she helped and the newfound bond with her parents. However, beneath this surface of tranquility, something still lingered in Morgana's mind. Despite the closure she had gained, there were still questions about her past that remained unanswered, small details that didn't quite fit the narrative she had been told. One evening, as Morgana was going through old documents left by Eudora, she found something peculiar. A letter tucked away inside a book Eudora had often read to her as a child. The letter was addressed to Eudora from someone Morgana had never heard of before. The content was cryptic, but one line stood out. "Keep her safe, Jay. She must never know the full truth." Morgana's heart raced as she read the letter over and over, trying to make sense of it. Who was this mysterious person, and what truth were they referring to? Could it be that there was more to her past than her parents had revealed? Determined to uncover the truth, Morgana began to investigate. She revisited the small town where Eudora had first found her, asking questions and piecing together fragments of information. What she discovered shook her to her sea. Eudora was not simply the kind-hearted woman who had rescued her from the orphanage. She had been part of a larger plan to protect Morgana from a truth that, if revealed, could have destroyed everything. The hidden truth. As Morgana delved deeper, she uncovered the shocking reality. Alban and Selene were not her biological parents. They were part of a complex web of deception, orchestrated by a powerful group with ties to the criminal underworld. People who had manipulated her entire life to keep her hidden from those who wanted to use her for their own gain. Morgana's real parents had been involved in something much darker than she had ever imagined. They were scientists working on a highly classified project with the potential to change the world, a project that had drawn the attention of powerful and dangerous individuals. When they realized the threat their work posed, they made the ultimate sacrifice to protect their daughter, faking their deaths and placing Morgana in hiding under the care of Eudora, who was tasked with raising her away from the dangers that lurked in the shadows. The truth, however, had its price. The group that had originally sought to use Morgana's parents' work for their own ends had never stopped searching for her. Orion, the man who had terrorized Alban and Selene, was merely a pawn in a... The true mastermind was still out there, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. The final confrontation, realizing the magnitude of the threat she faced, Morgana knew she had no choice but to confront the man behind it all. With the help of the private investigator who had become her ally, Morgana set a plan in motion to expose the truth and bring the mastermind to justice. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, Morgana discovered the identity of the man who had been pulling the strings all along. A shadowy figure known only as the Architect, a ruthless manipulator with ties to global criminal networks. The Architect had been obsessed with acquiring the knowledge Morgana's parents had tried so hard to keep hidden, and now, with Morgana herself as the last link to that knowledge, he would stop at nothing to get to her. In a tense and dangerous confrontation, Morgana and her allies cornered the Architect in a remote location, away from prying eyes. The man, cold and calculating, revealed that he had been following Morgana's life from afar, waiting for the moment she would inevitably lead him to the secrets her parents had left behind. But Morgana was no longer the frightened girl who had been abandoned and betrayed. She had grown into a formidable woman, one who had faced her fears and emerged stronger for it. In a moment of bravery and resolve, Morgana confronted the Architect with the truth she had uncovered and the evidence that would destroy his empire. The Architect, seeing that his plans had unraveled, made a desperate attempt to escape, but Morgana and her team were ready. In the ensuing struggle, the Architect was captured, and the authorities were finally able to dismantle the criminal network he had built over the years. A surprising revelation. As the dust settled and Morgana began to process the events that had unfolded, she received one final, unexpected revelation. Among the documents recovered from the Architect's hideout was a letter addressed to her, written by her real parents before they disappeared. The letter detailed their love for her, their hopes that she would one day understand why they had to leave her, and their trust in Eudora to protect her. But there was more. The letter contained a secret code, a puzzle only Morgana could solve, leading to a hidden vault where her parents had left behind the last pieces of their work. This work, which had been the cause of so much pain and danger, was not a weapon as the architect had believed, but rather the key to a breakthrough in medical science, a cure for a disease that had plagued humanity for centuries. Morgana, with the help of experts, was able to unlock the vault and bring her parents' work to light, not as a tool of destruction, but as a gift to the world. The discovery changed the course of history, saving countless lives and ensuring that her parents' legacy would be remembered for its true purpose. The aftermath, with the architect's empire dismantled and her parents' legacy secured, Morgana finally felt a sense of peace. The journey she had embarked on, filled with pain, betrayal, and loss, had led her to a place of understanding and fulfillment. She had uncovered the truth about her past, faced the demons that had haunted her, and emerged stronger for it. Alban and Celine, now understanding the full scope of what had happened, expressed their deep regret for the deception. But Morgana, having found the answers she sought, was able to forgive them. They had been pawns in a larger game, just like she had been, and together they decided to move forward, rebuilding their lives with the knowledge that the truth had finally been revealed. The support center continued to thrive, and Morgana, now more determined than ever, dedicated her life to helping those who had suffered as she had. The children who passed through the center saw in her a beacon of hope, a living testament to the power of resilience and the importance of uncovering the truth, no matter how painful it might be. A new chapter. Years later, as Morgana stood in the garden of the expanded support center, watching the children play, she felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Her journey had been long and arduous, filled with twists and turns she could never have anticipated, but it had led her to this moment, a moment where she could look back and know that everything she had endured had a purpose. The world had changed because of her parents' work, and Morgana knew that their legacy would live on in the countless lives that had been saved. But more importantly, she had found her own place in the world, a place where she could continue to make a difference, guided by the love and sacrifice of those who had come before her. As the sun set on another day, Morgana reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been abandoned and betrayed, but she had also been loved and protected. In the end, she had discovered the truth about her past, and in doing so, had found the strength to shape her future. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and a spirit unbroken by the trials she had faced, Morgana stepped forward into a new chapter of her life, ready to embrace whatever came next. If you found Morgana's story as incredible and moving as I did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more content that touches the heart. Together, we can transform pain into hope and create a world where love always finds a way.